Good morning. I think most of you will realize how difficult it is for us to talk to you sitting down. You know, our teaching mode is to get up and talk and engage with you. So we're really struggling to sit and talk at the same time. Now, I hope you all had a great breakfast, a good full English breakfast. Yeah, they're designed for farm labourers, to help them work throughout the day, hard physical labour, ploughing the fields. So I'm hoping it's given you enough energy for you to sit and listen right up to lunchtime. But actually, we want more than just listening. We want you to engage. We want you to share your questions, but also your own experiences in relation to this subject. So we're looking for engagement. So to begin with, we're going to start the day with a test, which I know you love tests. Erika yesterday told you the definition of Gen Alpha students, the Gen Alpha generation. So can you turn to the person next to you and try to recall from the distant past, what's the definition of Gen Alpha? From what years is Gen Alpha? 2010 to 2025. Yeah, okay. So pretty much 0 to 15-year-olds. Now, was there some genetic mutation in 2010? Probably not. So we're not saying that everything changed in 2010. We're talking about the impact of circumstances of the environment on the development of children, of people. And those, of course, started before 2010. They'll continue afterwards. But there are certain trends, there are patterns, there are characteristics which are typical or common of this generation. And that's what we're really digging into. Because yesterday, we had people who are talking very much about pedagogy, the teaching, and we talked people looking at the technology and people looking at assessment and looking at the future of technology and learning. But today we're looking at another element of the learning ecosystem, and that's the learner and our relationship with the learner. That's where our focus is today. I think we'll get stuck in. So I'm going to, first of all, ask Erika and Olga just to tell us why they were so interested in this topic that they decided to write a book about it. What generated your interest?
So first of all, our children are both Gen Alpha children. And Olga and I noticed that the way they learn, the way they process information is totally different to the way we used to learn and process information when we were in our student days. And we noticed that we had to adapt our parenting skills, to reach out to them in a more effective way. And all the way in Malta, when I deliver my workshops, teachers were coming up to me and telling me, but how can we reach out to them? I'm trying my best, but we're not reaching out. I'm not managing to reach out to them in the classroom. What is so different to this generation, from others? And so Olga and I dug deep and we started researching.
Yeah, absolutely. I personally, as a teacher, Erika, I wish I'd gone to your workshops back then. I started noticing the differences as a teacher working in the classroom when, as Erika pointed out, it's the way I was taught myself to teach wasn't working anymore. I wasn't engaging the students. There was some sort of friction, and it wasn't obvious what exactly it was in the classroom, so much less engagement. Really prompted me to think about, okay, right, let's sit down, let's have a look at what's going on. Is it the technology is impacting the learning, or is there anything else at play that I'm not noticing as a teacher? Do I have to rethink my teaching methods as well? And also Erika pointed out, I have 2 kids at home. My eldest turned 9 this year, my youngest is 5. So I'm also observing the way they work, learn, interact, socialize is very different how we grew up, how we did it. So I think there's a lot of interest in that topic.
Yeah, well. Yeah. And as we've mentioned before, that experience that we have as parents struggling to understand our children is multiplied 30 times when you're a teacher, or 1,000 times if you're running a school. So these are really important questions. Now, I'm going to start with you, Erika, because you've talked about the neurological kind of perspective on this question. Do you want to kind of give us a summary of some of those issues?
It's going to be a long summary. So there was another author, McCrindle, who researched about Generation Alpha too, besides Olga and myself. And there was a quote, we'll be getting quotes from our book as well, but this is a really good description of Generation Alpha. And the author goes, Generation Alpha, the most materially endowed, technologically literate, and formally educated generation ever. Generation Alpha, as I mentioned yesterday, were born into a world of technology. So as soon as they were born, their brains were getting wired digitally because they have technology all around them. So their brains are digitally rewired because of the high exposure to the highly stimulated world around them and the fast pace of information. They have also heightened neuroplasticity. So what is neuroplasticity? It is the wiring, the connections of the neural pathways in the brain. And these connections of the neural pathways is very, very fast due to the fast pace of information through technology too. They're also dopamine driven. So they're motivated through dopamine. So what is dopamine? It is a brain chemical. In neuroscience, we call it a neurotransmitter, which is released throughout the body when they are, for example, rewarded through their computer games. So as they're playing their computer games and they get an award through their game, they get a dopamine hit. They get this adrenaline feeling, the feel-good factor to keep on going. And that's dopamine. And they are dopamine driven due to technology. And many teachers in the classroom, and in fact, even in my workshops, teachers tell me, but this generation is so lazy. There's a lot of apathy. But it's not laziness or apathy. It's more that they need a release of dopamine because that's what they're getting through their technology. So now teachers in the classroom have to compete with technology to get that dopamine release in the classroom too. And how do they do that? By planning their lessons and engaging them. Like technology engages them at home or in any other environment. Due to technology as well, they get to use their executive function skills more. Executive function skills are our higher order skills, the problem solving, the critical thinking. They're also strategic planning. There are a lot of games on technology which reinforces these skills. So their executive function skills are being used during these games or when they're using certain apps. And they also are good at task switching. So for example, they're playing a game, they get a message on their mobile, they focus on the message and they get back onto their computer game. So they're very good at task switching. Even our brains are getting rewired to task switch very well. Okay, and then the last point is they're very good at visual spatial skills as well because of technology. So technology has wired their brains differently to how our brains are wired.
Okay, thank you, Erika. So often when we think about Gen Alpha students in our schools and classrooms, we often focus on the difficulties. So I wanted to just, before we get into that, to focus a little bit on some of the positive aspects of Gen Alpha as students, as learners. Olga, what would you?
Yeah,
what would you
absolutely. It's amazing that to observe this generation and their strengths in the classroom, how they learn. What you can immediately notice is that they're doers. They absolutely would, with curiosity, would like to try the new language first, and they have not that much fear of making a mistake or doing something wrong, as a direct result probably from the digital exposure as well. When you, for example, you get instant feedback in a game, and you just try again, you just try a different strategy, you just do something differently. And I think as a result of that, that makes them less scared of trying, of doing, and applying skills. I think they're very good at kind of projects, because a lot of stuff they do in games, for example, is very practical and task-based. So instead of learning a language point or like certain vocabulary set, they will be more thinking, how can I apply that? What kind of product can I create with this? So they're naturally doers and they're creative. Actually, they create almost as much as they consume. If you compare the stuff they see or read online compared to what they want to do. They want to create their own channel, they want to create their own project. So, and also the collaborative nature of this generation, I think, is also a great strength, because working together is quite a natural thing for them, taking on different roles, taking on different avatars, and kind of applying skills as a team to reach a certain goal. I also think that they're curious. There's definitely genuine curiosity about all sorts of aspects. What amazes me, they don't really kind of stick with a narrow topic of interest. The interest can come from all sorts of sources, probably also because of the digital exposure. They could be interested in cooking at an early age, or for example, my son, I'm noticing that he's seen how to cook eggs, and he's frying his eggs in the morning before he goes to school. So you can notice that they want to learn skills that make them independent earlier. I think also, because you probably noticed this, sometimes they don't ask you, they just Google. How to micro learning. So how do I create this thing? How do I fry eggs? Instead of asking your mom, they'll go and Google. So I see that as a strength. Self-paced learning and the focus on getting that information out of there is also a strength, which we can utilize. We can really create the opportunity for them to do that in class.
Yesterday, Fiona commented on the use of the phrase "search it up" instead of "look it up." Search it up, in the sense that it's more than a piece of information.
Now, Gen Alpha.
Yeah.
Of course, that has direct implication of the role of the teacher, the role of the school, and you name it. Because there's a lot of stuff they can do, and they don't need us, which is scary. It's understandable, but they do need us in a way that we can guide them, we can organize the learning environment for them.
To add on to what Olga said, Generation Alpha tend to work smart, not hard. So they would try and find their shortcuts to get to where they want to, which isn't a bad thing. We would instead, our generation would work really hard to get there, the hard way, when they have all the tools, in hand to get through to their destination or their target in a very quick and efficient way. So that's one of the...
It's interesting to listen to you, because almost all the things that you were saying as positive could be a challenge to someone who's taking a very traditional approach to teaching.
Oh, absolutely. In the context, that can become challenging. I was also thinking of a lot of Generation Alpha traits that they show in the classroom as a result of not just of their digital exposure. It's also, let's take the wider social context. Let's take the global context of the environment they're growing up in. The positive thing, in my opinion, is that because everything's so interconnected nowadays, they have this, I guess, less rigid views on certain aspects. They're more empathetic, probably more global orientated. less boundaries, less restrictions. I think that is definitely a strength. They can be connected with a friend from a different country, from different continents. So that definitely has, if you see it as a positive thing, I think they grow up with less bias, probably more empathetic, and learning to interact with people from very different cultures, very different backgrounds. So there's this natural predisposition to accept.
Yeah.
If we see it as a positive, of course,
Yes.
all sorts of points of view and perspectives as well, potentially.
Yeah. I think we're in an environment where inclusivity is seen as a positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not all around the world. Erika, could you give us kind of a quick overview of the things which teachers tend to find challenging about Gen Alpha?
And I hear you're going to agree with me. The short attention span. Gen Alpha have a very short attention span because they are used to, with a click of a button, they get their information. So that is, their brain is getting wired to get used to instant gratification. So the here and now, click of a button, I have it now. So now parents and teachers and educators have to make them experience delayed gratification this time. The short attention span comes from the instant gratification. And as Olga and I were mentioned before, the attention and the motivation are both interrelated. They have cognitive fatigue. They get more cognitive fatigue than we do. Why? Because of the exposure of technology. Okay, mental tiredness. They tend to over-rely on technology. So if they need to look up something, as Olga mentioned, okay, they will go and Google it. They won't come and ask us, which is good but dangerous too. Okay, because it depends on what topic they're going to be searching. They also have brain overstimulation because of technology. If they're at length at their computer or at their gadgets, their brain gets overstimulated. And what happens then? They walk into the classroom, their brain is overstimulated, and they start getting a little bit fidgety. So, and this is where then educators tend to think that students have ADHD then. So, but it's not, it doesn't have to be ADHD. There are the genuine cases of ADHD, but then there's also the fidget because of their brain overstimulation. They also might have poor offline social skills. So they're very good at online social skills, but then when it comes to offline, they might suffer. Okay, so they're together in a group, but they're each on their mobiles. So they're socializing, but not social. They also might have emotional dysregulation due to the overstimulation of the brain, okay, due to excessive use of technology. So we're not saying that technology is bad. We're saying that there needs to be a balance of technology. But an excessive use of technology can become an addiction. In fact, the World Health Organization has listed an excessive use of technology, as an addiction on their website. And they might also have sleep and mental health issues due to all this social media, access to social media and seeing the ideal on social media and wanting to be like that ideal, trying to reach that ideal. So yes, emotion dysregulation comes from that as well.
Okay, so I thought we could dig a little deeper into, you said socialize but not social, I think. And this question of social relationships, because often it's really important in the classroom, what's the relation? A lot of what we're doing is trying to create a collaborative atmosphere, an atmosphere where people are not afraid to try things out. They work together, they learn together. How does that feel different? Do we have to think a little differently about how they're going to work together?
Well, I guess we talked about them being able to socialize. Clearly, online socialization is a very A-B experience. So you type a message and then you get a response. You have some time to think. You don't see the body language, which, as we probably, I think the audience knows, that we get almost like more than 50% of the information through the body language and the facial expressions. And then as in the classroom, they might misinterpret certain social clues, the body language, the mimic, the facial expressions, due to probably reduced exposure to faces. COVID, let's think about the lockdowns and how people's faces were covered. I noticed my daughter was born in the first week of lockdown in the UK, actually. And what I noticed, which is quite a unique thing, she was still a baby and we were on a bus somewhere. She was almost a year. She would smile at people behind the masks and she would recognize the eyes. So the eyes were the only visual clue available to her at that time. And she would only rely on this. So I think it's an example of how we adapt to the environment we're in. And in the classroom, the students might struggle in interpreting clues from each other. So we, as teachers, I think we need to be extra, I think mindful is the word, mindful of that these learners might not be natural at recognizing and responding to each other's physical avatars. Because, you know, when we first met, I thought, oh, okay, I haven't seen the other side of you. I only see the Zoom portrait. And I think we all kind of, we now see the people like that. If we spend a lot of time on our computers, we don't know how tall they are, you know, we don't feel the feeling of it. Yeah. So in the physical classroom, we have to be mindful of that, the spatial awareness, how we sit together, how we organize the seating, the horseshoes, the working stations the student work together on. So extra layer of attention to that, I think.
To add to that, Gen Alpha enjoy online interaction, but they also enjoy collaborative teamwork within the classroom. They like working in groups within the classroom. So I would encourage educators to adopt collaborative learning within the classroom. They like working as a team jointly on something common.
If there are teachers saying, yeah, but it doesn't quite work, I'm struggling to get them to work together, are there any advice or tips that you have found?
Well, I think in language learning, it's always been difficult to organize people to talk, to be honest with you. So I wouldn't, as a teacher, I would just look at the classroom management in the first place. I would look at the relationship. Me as a teacher, what kind of relationship do I have with my learners? Are they comfortable working together? Are these two people comfortable working together? Or is it better to just, you know, create a safe group for this learner here and that learner there? Do I prepare the students for that interaction in groups? Do they understand the task clearly? Do I have the task displayed on the whiteboard? Because I see that so many times that, you know, teachers give out a task, they put students in groups. By the time they sit down and start working in the groups, they forgot what the task was. So kind of, because obviously attention span. So yeah, displaying the task on the board, clear outcomes, visuals that will help learners achieve their goals. Of course, with language learners, with language learning as well, a big part of it is the level. Of course, it's the level. So if we're talking lower level students and English teaching, they need a lot of scaffolding, they need a lot of prompts, they need a lot of visuals or text clues to help them interact. And they need to understand the task, because teachers might ask the learners, do you understand? And of course, like with adult learners, of course, the answer is yes. And then they get together and go, so what was the task again? How are you, by the way? Yeah. And what did you do yesterday? So creating this sort of purpose for classwork. It's a big topic, and I know it's challenging for teachers, and it always has been. Always has been.
It's important for educators to know, education professionals, that we're not born, children or any individual are not born with skills. Skills are taught, and they're taught through interaction. So we cannot take it for granted that children know how to work in a group. It is a skill that we, as educators, need to teach them. We need to model it. So we explicitly need to teach them how to work in a group, because that's a skill as well. Teamwork is a skill. It's like learning mathematical skills or language skills. These type of skills, group work, emotional regulation, any other skill, social skill, needs to be taught explicitly. Like, for example, Olga said, give them a task each, and they adopt it within the group. So we need to teach them, we need to support them in learning the collaborative skill.
Yeah. And like all skills, it's not enough just to explain it. You have to go through stages of development, Let's focus on another element, and that's the relationship with technology, or the importance of technology. What have you observed as trends in this?
Well, I think Erika will join in, I think, with this. Of course, they do expect technology. They have technology at home, and it's interesting that for them it sounds like the digital and the real, it's the same. It doesn't, that there is no
border. It's like meshed.
Which can be a good thing, by the way. I'm just saying that when we talk about technology, I think we need to be mindful not to say that everybody should have technology because they have technology exposure at home. And as Erika said, children already come in the classroom overstimulated. So we really don't want to overstimulate them even further and get them, too exposed. We don't want them to just sit there with their iPads all lesson, right? So they do expect technology in the classroom. Anything?
Another thing I want to mention also is the ethics. We mentioned this yesterday in yesterday's panel, the ethics of AI and technology. I was discussing this with someone yesterday. The students tend to swipe, look at a reel, watch it, swipe up, not interesting, swipe up until they find something else. But they don't know what's happening behind those reels, the algorithms. Why is always the same? I don't know if you noticed when you have your mobile, you're talking to someone, or else you click on, for example, the royal, because I love the UK royal history, going on Princess Kate. And suddenly a lot of video reels of Princess Kate start coming up. Mm-hmm. That's the algorithms. We need to teach them what's behind those reels, what's behind social media, the ethics of AI and technology. And that also comes in with emotional intelligence. So we need to teach them also, I mentioned this yesterday, to decipher between fake news and real news, for them to be independent enough to decide, listen, this is not real news, this is fake, and to disregard it. And I think that is really, really important, because from a young age, they're exposed to these reels and all these YouTube videos and TikTok videos, and they think it's real, And I see it from my daughter, who's a typical Gen Alpha. And she's always looking at, she watches these reels and talking about conspiracy theories, about a pop star and all that, an actor. And she thinks it's all real. So we need to teach them and educate them that, listen, not everything on technology is real. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. Okay, so a lot of the people here are responsible for managing teachers, groups of teachers across schools, universities. What advice might you give them to help them prepare their teachers better for getting the most out of their Gen Alpha students?
I think there are two questions. I think there's the practical aspect, what kind of technology we can afford to have in the classroom, what is the required and what is good to have, and what is probably okay but not necessary. In my experience as a teacher teaching the classroom, with the whiteboard, the interactive board is a great idea to have in the classroom, because boards like that create an opportunity for collaboration, and if students also have, well, maybe just one laptop per group or a station they're working on, that is a good idea, because they can work together and upload their work on a collaborative space, which we can all see. Yeah, so it's something like this, because if we leave students just to work on the devices individually, we might not know what they're doing then. They might be Amazon shopping. Happened in my lessons. So we don't know, but we would like them to be able to display the contribution on the board. That is the practical example. Also, there is a question of preparing teachers as well. Absolutely. I'm a digital learning designer and I love using technology, but the more I use technology in the classroom, I realize that we need to be mindful of not just the technology per se, is what function the technology serves, how it helps teachers teach better, how it makes the teacher's life easier, not more difficult. Especially if the internet goes down. We had an example in the school where everybody got iPads. Teachers got iPads, and their job was to display the content on the whiteboard. The moment the iPad doesn't connect to the whiteboard, your lesson is gone. Yeah, so we have to also be mindful of how we deal with the situations like that on a practical level. How teachers can manage situations like that, what kind of, just to have some professional development on what's available to teach, the interactive, the software, that's up to date, maybe the ethical use of AI for some point, to some extent. I'm not an expert in that, but it would be great to hear some ideas.
I would say get the educators to know their students in the classroom and to connect with them. That's the first in the classroom, to bond and to connect with their students, because once they're connected and bonded with their students, learning will happen naturally. And to ensure that the educators engage their students. It doesn't need to be through technology, solely through technology. Technology is one of the tools that teachers can use, but to plan the lessons, teachers need to walk into the classroom having planned the lessons to ensure that they're going to engage their students in different ways, in creative ways, practical, but also meaningful. The word meaningful with Gen Alpha is so important, and that is relevant to them. Gen Alpha will shut down if they see that the lesson is not relevant to them. They will turn to their technology, and that would be relevant for them. So we need to make sure that teachers engage them through meaningful and relevant ways. Another 2 points is to teach them from delayed gratification. I think that is so important, to teach them from instant to delayed, to adopt situations and activities which help them delay their gratification for more patience, and also to teach them intrinsic motivation. They tend to have extrinsic motivation. What am I going to get out of this? What reward am I going to get out of this? Okay, I have my 2 teenagers, Matthew who's 15 and Nicola who's 12. If I give them some house chores, they tell me, what's the first thing you think they're gonna ask? What are you going to give me for doing this? Because on technology, they're used to getting a reward. They know they're gonna get the reward or points before they even start. So what I'm doing now is training them how getting from extrinsic to intrinsic motivation. So we're doing this, for example, we're studying, we're learning, for our own good for the future. So that's another thing that we need to teach them, extrinsic motivation from extrinsic to intrinsic motivation.
Okay, thank you. So if we were to broaden the perspective a bit and think of a number of people who are principals who are responsible for the whole program, the whole institution, and they're thinking, how can we make our whole program more effective for Gen Alpha students? And it might be the curriculum, the assessment, it might be a number of dimensions. Any advice you'd give them?
I was thinking that the two important points in my opinion is that when we design learning experiences, I think it's important to move from content itself to the skills-based curriculum, what kind of skills they develop and the product they create. So moving to maybe project-based learning, a little bit more portfolio building, so that there is an outcome, the practical outcome at the end that students can not only showcase, but maybe refer to in the future. There's something they can create and take away with them. So yeah, skills and process orientated, because in language teaching we have process learning and the goal learning. Yeah? So we either acquire a certain number of language points, or we focus more on what we do with them, how we apply them, and what situations we can apply them to be more effective, to become more effective communicators, for example, how to become more effective, how to organize something better. So not just those hard skills, but soft skills as well. And the second point, I was thinking assessment definitely has to be rethought in a way that students can be more involved in that assessment themselves. When they, for example, at the end of term, they present the project, they can work in groups to assess each other's work. They can do self-assessment a little bit more. So we're not just focusing on testing. I love testing. I love quantitative assessment, but also let's think about the qualitative assessment. Let's think more about how students can assess themselves, each other's work, and how teachers can assess them, not just at the end of the curriculum of the term, but do the sort of informal assessment during each lesson, for example, where you don't really tell people how they're doing, but you observe their performance, their engagement, and their development as well. So I was thinking those two things.
To add to that as well, to build on what Olga was saying, it's also feedback. We improve when we get feedback. So Gen Alpha, and I know it's not always possible because I've been in the classroom, is immediate feedback. Gen Alpha like immediate feedback because that's what they get through their technology, through their gadgets. It's not always possible, but if it's not possible to give them the immediate feedback, then use a strategy such as class correction, if it's possible due to restriction of time, to go over the work that was corrected 2 weeks after that was given in 2 weeks ago. So because Gen Alpha will not want to know what they did 2 weeks ago. So to revisit the work, encourage teachers to do class correction, adopt class correction to revisit the work, and that would also be a way of reviewing the work they've done 2 weeks ago, a form of revision as well. And also to, as mentioned yesterday, try and focus on assessment for learning. Assessment of learning is also must be included, but assessment for learning, where we give them the feedback on how to improve the next time, is giving it to them in little steps to improve, rather giving it to them in a whole chunk. So that's another point to be...
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much. And thank you very much for those answers, which is kind of an input into your thinking. What I'd like now is to kind of turn the tables a bit. And I would like to hear we'd like to hear any questions you've got, but also any comments or experience that you'd like to share. Okay, I was going to give you a few minutes to think about it, but hands shot up. So please go ahead.
Ask that you do use the mic, please, because then we're able to catch the questions.
Thank you very much for the panel. Erika, I would like to go back a little bit to the issue of ADHD, because I feel as a principal that there is a pandemic of ADHD in Brazil. We don't know what is happening. We don't know if the diagnosis is not accurate, or if, as you said, executive function needs to be trained. And I think we do have that responsibility in schools, but also the families. And as you were talking about the attention span, I wonder, are we training the brains of the prefrontal cortex of our kids, and not only as schools, but as families, for them to be in a math lesson that might be uninteresting in comparison to something they see on their phones? On the other hand, is this the cause of this explosion in the number of ADHD diagnoses that we see nowadays? Has it become a chronic issue because of technology, or what is happening?
Do you know what's happening?
There are different reasons as to why there is
It's a great question.
this explosion of ADHD. In Malta, it's happening too, that there's this explosion of ADHD. I give workshops on emotion regulation, and when children or individuals are emotionally dysregulated, they tend to be a little bit fidgety, or else not totally focused and not concentrated, and those are symptoms of ADHD. But it does not mean that they are diagnosed as having ADHD. So we really need to be careful in the classroom as to when we're seeing these signs of ADHD. It doesn't mean that they have ADHD. And the thing is that they are being sent to, nothing against educational psychologists, but being sent off to educational psychologists when we see these symptoms and signs and are being labeled as ADHD, when all they might have is emotional dysregulation due to different reasons.
And Erika mentioned dopamine. I think one of the things with ADHD, is a dopamine deficiency. I don't know exactly how it works, but we can observe that the inability to concentrate and sustain focus especially is down to the lack of dopamine. So it could be the exact reason why people struggle to focus is because it's not as exciting as the digital exposure, the digital stimulation.
So they start moving around, not paying attention.
Yeah.
And that's the majority of children now.
But not necessarily ADHD.
No.
Well, ADHD is a neurological condition, isn't it?
Against educational psychologists.
Yeah.
But I think
see an
Diagnosis
We
of
see it in
ADHD.
adults. We see it in adults as well. We probably notice that in ourselves.
I think it's worth pointing out in the UK, it's probably the same in other countries, that the definition of ADHD has changed. And so apart from the genuine changes that we're talking about, I'm not quite sure whether it's 10, 15 years ago, there was a change so that it used to be that ADHD was only diagnosed when it created a dysfunctional situation where people had problems communicating and learning. Now it's extended, so it doesn't necessarily mean there's a dysfunction in the classroom to have ADHD. So it's kind of a formal thing which has changed some of the statistics.
Excessive use of technology creates emotional dysregulation. When my son stays longer than the time I give him, I notice that he gets off from his computer emotionally dysregulated, because he'd be in a world of his technology. Then when he gets off, he's disorientated,
Let's catch another question I think at the back. Yep.
Hi. I just want to comment on, I was really impressed about everything you guys said. I have ADHD. I have two kids with ADHD, and I have two kids who were in a literacy process during the pandemic with online classes, and I can see how this has shaped the way they are now. But I also want to comment that some schools in Brazil, like the school that they attend, I think they have a very good way of the way things are assessed in school, rather than in the past you just have to have one test for that specific curricular area, and then you have to have that test. And if you do it right, you do it right, and if you don't do it right, well, bummer. But the way they have changed the way students are assessed into like a gamification thing. So they have mini things for every school subject. So for example, out of 100 points, so 15 points are going to be for these, 10 points for that, and 20 points for that, and whatever, that deal with different skills and different areas and different, I don't know, tests, because they can have a written test, they can have a spoken test, they can have a visual test. And this is good for kids like that, because you stimulate kids to do their best in different ways, rather than just, making sure their final result is gonna be that one test. So I want to see if you guys have that here in the UK, what your visuals are on this specific topic.
We, as mentioned yesterday, that's inclusion. So what you mentioned is inclusion. And we need to understand the difference between inclusion and integration. Inclusion is adopting teaching strategies that would include everyone, that everyone can learn with. So if a psychologist comes up to the teacher and tells them, you need to use these strategies with this child with autism, those strategies would be beneficial for all, for everybody. Children with strategies for children with ADHD, those strategies would be good for everyone in the classroom. So use those strategies with everyone, and that's what inclusion is all about. Integration is getting a child with neurodevelopmental conditions, placing them in the mainstream, and using strategies just for that child, and the rest would use different ones. That's integration. But inclusion is using strategies that everyone would benefit from.
Thank you.
Just to continue the topic, but I think he was talking about assessment. Because one thing is inclusion in the classroom and inclusion in what you're doing in the classroom. It's another thing, inclusion in assessment. Because, okay, you are including them and you do that in the classroom, but in the end of the day, when you're testing them, you test them the same way. You're not testing them differently.
Yeah, that is an additional challenge. You're absolutely right. Was the next question here? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm from Vietnam, and I don't have questions to ask, but I'm going to share two concerns that I have in my mind. I think yesterday and today we talk a lot about Gen Alpha, who they are, how they learn, and what affects them and stuff. But in my context, for example, when working with this group of students, I feel the key questions for both parents and teachers are how to create motivation for them to bring them to class, especially in the private sector when they don't choose to go to English class. Their parents send them there and tell them, you need that for your job in the future. And for some families, every day taking the kids to class is like a fight between the parents and the student. But it's not relevant to me. It's not meaningful to me. Why you push me to go to class? So I think the key questions we should ask is like how we can create more inspiration and motivation for kids to go to class and to feel that I want to go to class before we talk about how we help them learn effectively. And the second point is, I'm very much with Erika when you bring up the idea about how to create bonding in the classroom and how to bring social emotional learning and mindfulness to the classroom back to that. I've tried with my Jail Alpha students, and we bring back mindfulness practice and social emotional learning. And they're okay with not having the phone. They see the values of the connections. And a lot of students would just say, I want to go to class because I feel the security, I feel the respect, and I feel the connection with my friends and my teachers, and that's what I want. So my big question is, we understand the features of this generation. Should we go along with them and just push them go further into that? Or should we help them refocus and reorient and redirect them? Going back to the core value of human being, of connection and happiness. So that's the big question I have in my mind now.
That's a huge question.
I think there were two questions. The first one was about creating a motivation, creating an environment that makes them interested in doing what they're doing, because we talked about the fact they don't want to do anything if they don't see the relevance of this. And the second question was on, shall we just go along with them? I don't know how, which question shall we?
Want to go for the motivation one? And then
Yeah, okay, with the motivation, as a teacher and a parent, what we know about this generation is, and also the common humanity of motivation, I guess. We're motivated when there's two things happen, or one thing happens out of two. The first thing, if something we do is meaningful, it aligns with our values, it aligns with our, like reading Peppa Pig book the 500th time to your kid is not very exciting, but it's meaningful because you're spending time together. It's not very, exciting, but it's meaningful. And or if something is exciting, if you're just playing, I don't know, Candy Crush Saga on your phone, yeah, it is very exciting, but not very meaningful. So we're searching for at least one component of it. Ideally the two together. So finding something relevant for the students is drilling into their own values. What are their needs? What is it exactly that motivates them? Maybe knowing them, getting to know them a little bit better, maybe just to finding what makes them tick, what is that they're interested in, and just giving them this agency to maybe showcase their talent in the classroom. If they're very good at maths, and they come to an arts class, like my son hates art because he's very mathematical, and it's interesting. I was thinking that how can you take your interest in maths and apply it to art, and then demonstrate your knowledge and your skills, and that creates meaningful aspect when people feel good about themselves, and when people have a positive experience and they feel that they are in a situation of success. So I think that we're down to creating this situation of success for any learners. That is where their intrinsic motivation is.
with regards to the second question, I believe in Gen Alpha thrive on bonding and on connection, because that's something that technology is not going to give them, the human interaction. So when they come into the classroom, they yearn for the teacher to bond with them, to interact with them, to give them empowerment, and in the classroom, to give them voice and agency. However, in saying that too, in the world of work, they cannot have it their own way. So in the classroom, we need to train them that sometimes they need to do things that they don't want to do. And we need to train them from a very young age. So as I said yesterday, we need to meet them halfway, but they need to meet us halfway too. So there are rules and laws out there which we need to train them for as well in the world of work and also in the country. So school will be at sort of preparing them for the world out there. When we go to work, we have to do certain things that we don't want to, and that's creating resilience.